Have you ever been treated as if you didn't belong somewhere, just because of how you dress, the color of your skin, or for not fitting other people's expectations? If so, get ready to witness one of the most uncomfortable and humiliating scenes that could happen on an airplane, and how this woman turned everything upside down without raising her voice. And if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and comment below where you're watching from. Because today, you're going to see how silence, when used in the right way, can be the most powerful response someone can give. Danielle Carter was the kind of woman who walked into any room and didn't need to announce herself. She exuded confidence with an almost hypnotic calm. At 42 years old, after 3 decades climbing every rung of the aviation corporate ladder, she had become CEO of Atlantic Sky, one of the largest airlines in the United States. But that rainy afternoon at Newark Airport, no one seemed to recognize who she was, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She wore linen pants, a simple cotton blouse, and comfortable sneakers. The conference badge was still folded at the bottom of her bag. No makeup, no rings, no expensive watch. After 3 straight days of meetings and hangar visits, all she wanted was to get home unnoticed. She walked to the boarding gate with her digital ticket already open on her phone. Her name showed as D. Williams, a pseudonym she often used when traveling for work discreetly, a common strategy among high-level executives, especially on inspections or observational trips. Boarding the plane posed no issues. The gate agent merely scanned her ticket and wished her good flight. When she reached first class, she noticed that almost all the seats were taken. Struck by a slight backache, she carefully bent down to stow her carry-on in the overhead bin, then settled into seat 1A with relief. Up to that point, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the silence didn't last long. The flight attendant in charge of first class, a white man in his 30s, wearing a pristine uniform and bearing an authoritative expression, approached with hurried steps. He looked at Danielle with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Not once did he smile. Before confirming any information, he barked in a harsh tone, "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Danielle regarded him calmly and handed over her ticket without uttering a word. But he didn't even bother to look closely. First class requires photo ID. It's company policy. I'm going to need you to stand up now and come with me to the back while we sort this out. The tension in the air grew heavy, and Danielle, without moving a muscle, already knew exactly how this was going to end. A few glances shifted toward her. Danielle felt the heat of exposure rising slowly in her chest, but her face remained impassive. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inwardly, a mix of indignation and sorrow gathered like a cold stone in her stomach. The attendant took a step forward, as if about to lay a hand on her, and said in a low but still commanding tone, "I'm trying to avoid a bigger scene. If you cooperate, this can be resolved quickly." His words were like a blade hidden in a fake kindness. Danielle took a deep breath, raised her gaze again, and spoke calmly. "Are you sure you want to keep going with this?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, perhaps surprised by the tranquility of her response. But his pride seemed greater than any common sense. "Yes, I am. And if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call airport security." The silence that followed was different from before. It was dense. Danielle stood up slowly, retrieved her phone, and made a single call. Nothing more than, "It's me. We need to talk to the captain now." The attendant watched everything, bewildered, still convinced he was dealing with some imposter. 2 passengers murmured among themselves, uncomfortable with the scene. One of them, a middle-aged man with a laptop in his lap, leaned toward his wife and whispered, "This is going to cause trouble. She doesn't look like she's lying." Less than 2 minutes later, the curtain to the cockpit was yanked open. The captain, a stocky, graying man, strode out, eyes fixed on the scene. His gaze met Danielle's, and in that instant, his expression shifted. It was as if reality had snapped back into focus. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice firmer than his tone of surprise would allow. The attendant froze, eyes darting between the two of them, as if his mind were racing to rewind to that moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began, turning to the onlookers, "allow me a brief course correction. What you've just witnessed was a serious failure in our service protocol and in the respect we owe to all our customers. This is Danielle Carter, CEO of Atlantic Sky, and today she boarded incognito to assess the level of excellence in the airline. She leads. Unfortunately, she witnessed an example of what we must never allow to happen again." The reaction in the cabin was mixed. Some lowered their eyes, others widened them. The attendant turned completely pale. Danielle remained silent. She didn't need to say another word. The truth lay exposed before everyone, and the shame was no longer hers. The attendant, now with trembling hands and a flushed face, tried to stammer out an apology, but words failed him. He seemed unsure whether to look at Danielle or the captain, like a student reprimanded in public who finally comprehends the magnitude of his mistake. Danielle simply held his gaze for a brief second, not with anger, but with something even more unsettling: disappointment. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated like this, as if her presence in a prestigious space needed justification. But in that moment, what hurt most wasn't the humiliation, it was realizing that, even at the top of the hierarchy, people still judged solely by appearance. The captain signaled for the attendant to step back, and he obeyed like a robot, slowly retreating toward the rear of the cabin. Silence reigned for a few seconds, until Danielle sat down again, composed her posture, and closed her eyes for a moment. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, but she was already emotionally drained. She recalled, with a heavy heart, the first time she boarded a plane at 17 as part of a young talent's internship program. Back then, she carried a red folder filled with all her dreams, letters of recommendation, college applications, sketches of aeronautical engineering projects. She was the only black girl among dozens of students, and she had been met with the same kind of distrust she had just relived. As the captain returned to the cockpit and passengers tried to refocus, some embarrassed, others pretending nothing had happened, Danielle opened her phone front camera. She adjusted her hair, took a deep breath, and impulsively snapped a photo of her own face. Not to post, but to remember. To keep that moment as an internal record of strength. She knew it wouldn't be the last time something like this happened. She also knew that, despite everything she'd achieved, the world still needed simple lessons about respect. For her, this was just another reminder that there was still much work to be done, and that, unfortunately, part of that work began within the very company she led. Later, once airborne, a younger flight attendant, visibly uncomfortable, approached with a special tray. "Mrs. Carter, the captain asked us to serve this as a formal apology. It's on the house." Danielle nodded her thanks. The young attendant hesitated, bit her lip, and finally said, "I just wanted to tell you, it was an honor to see you handle everything. So inspiring." Danielle offered a small, tired but genuine smile. "Thank you," she replied, then looked out the window, where the blue sky stretched out like a cloak of silence. Outside, everything seemed at peace. But inside, she carried every word, every gesture, every glance from that flight's beginning. The next morning, Danielle woke before sunrise. Her body still tired, her mind weighed down, yet something inside her would not allow hesitation. It was her sense of duty. She dressed deliberately but unhurriedly. Dark gray dress pants, a white shirt with rolled sleeves, and discreet shoes. No makeup, no adornments. Just her, fully herself. Upon arriving at Atlantic Skies, Headquarters. She declined the executive elevator. She climbed 7 flights of stairs in silence, feeling each step prepare her spirit for what lay ahead. No one in the building seemed to know she had arrived, and it was better that way. She passed through reception like any other employee here. No one would dare stop her. Inside the executive committee's meeting room, the atmosphere was different. Tension and expectation hung in the air. All the directors were present, on time. Even the flight captain had been summoned, his expression restrained yet respectful. To everyone's surprise, the attendant was there too. He looked visibly uncomfortable, his starched collar choking him like a noose. Many averted their eyes, as if simply making eye contact with her would constitute an apology. Danielle entered with erect posture, sat at the head of the table, and placed her folder firmly in front of her. The board chair began offering institutional apologies, but she raised her hand command. Firm. "No," she said. "Today, I'm the one speaking," she began, not with anger, but with precision. She recounted step by step what had happened on the flight. Each question from the attendant, each disdainful glance, each complicit silence from passengers and crew. She did not embellish or dramatize. She simply presented reality as it was, raw and unfiltered. She made clear she was not speaking as CEO, but as a passenger, as a woman, as a black woman, and that, on that flight, she was not treated as a customer. She was treated like a fraud. And the worst part, she continued, eyes fixed on each person at the table, is that this did not happen by accident. It was learned. It was allowed. It was fueled by years of institutional negligence. The attendant tried to interrupt, insisting he had followed protocol. But Danielle did not break eye contact. You did not follow protocol. You followed your instinct. And your instinct told you that a simple, solitary black woman could not occupy that seat. That is not security. That is bias. The ensuing silence was more than embarrassed, it was almost painful. Danielle inhaled deeply, as if her heart were on fire, yet she refused to back down. Starting today, she announced, every employee of this company, without exception, will undergo mandatory training in empathy, structural racism, and unconscious bias identification. It is not optional. It is not symbolic. It is institutional. She then rose from her chair and walked to the window overlooking one of the airline's runways. She stood there for several seconds, motionless, watching planes taxi in the distance. Then she turned slowly back to the group. If anyone does not wish to be part of this transformation, the door is open. But let me warn you now, this company's culture has changed. There is no longer room for anyone who thinks respect is a choice. The meeting ended in silence. No protests, no applause. Just the understanding that something significant had happened. The attendant was removed from his duties that very week. But for Danielle, this was not a personal victory. It was the bare minimum one should expect from an organization still reluctant to change. Late that afternoon, alone in her office, she retrieved the old photo from her first hangar visit as a teenager, eyes shining, heart brimming with dreams. She smiled, this time with her eyes too, because despite the pain, the humiliation, and the emotional exhaustion, she knew each scar she carried had built something much greater than a title. It had built a legacy. That same night, alone at home, Danielle could not sleep. She sat on the sofa with a cup of tea that had gone cold in her hand without her noticing. The apartment was silent except for a distant Atlanta traffic noise. She stared at the turned-off television screen, but her mind wandered. She recalled a specific afternoon many years ago, when she was still an intern and was barred at the entrance of the very company where she now presided. She was only 22 and wore the same badge as everyone else, but the guard insisted she must be in the building next door, where HR was located. She stood at the entrance for 25 minutes until her supervisor came down to confirm who she was. No one apologized that day. All they said was, "Oh, it was a misunderstanding." These moments were nothing new to her. Yet each new episode left its own mark. The next day, her name began circulating on websites and social media after someone on the flight posted an anonymous account of the incident. The phrase "CO humiliated by flight attendant" gained traction and, within hours, the story went viral. Danielle declined all interview requests. She didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. But one thing caught her attention. Messages started arriving from employees of the company itself, ground agents, flight attendants, young professionals at the start of their careers. Many said things like, "I always thought this kind of situation was normal until I saw how you handle it. You gave me courage to no longer accept certain silences." Danielle read each message with tears in her eyes. Over the following days, she wandered through company departments unannounced. She visited hangars, cafeterias, control rooms. She spoke with people who had never been in the same room as the president. And in every corner, she noticed the same look: surprise, respect, and in some cases, relief. Danielle did not want to be the hero of the moment. She wanted everyone to understand that change doesn't start at the top, it begins with listening. And at that moment, what she needed most was to listen. During one of these visits, a veteran mechanic, hands stained with grease and eyes earnest, said, "When we see you down here with us, it feels like this company really belongs to all of us." Danielle thanked him, unsure what to say, because deep down, she knew that was the greatest compliment she could receive. Meanwhile, the board was in turmoil. Some members pushed for a formal, public apology from the attendant. Others feared the media exposure would tarnish Atlantic Sky's image. But Danielle was clear. She would not allow any charade. If we are going to be transparent, let's be genuinely so. Culture changes with accountability, not with speeches. She knew this stance wouldn't please everyone, but pleasing people had never been her mission. In an extraordinary meeting with investors who expected her to discuss the financial impact of the incident, Danielle chose a different approach. She projected a single phrase on the screen. What holds more value, a quarter's profit or everyday dignity? Then she spoke for 20 minutes about how trust is built, not with marketing, but with concrete actions. Months later, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, Danielle visited her mother's house on the outskirts of Stone Mountain, where she had grown up. It was a simple place, with a wooden porch, potted plants in recycled containers, and the sweet smell of freshly baked cornbread drifting from the kitchen. She sat at the table with her mother, as she had when she was a teenager, and noticed the same little details that never seemed to change. The old radio in the corner, the faded floral rug, the chirping birds outside. Her mother served the coffee and asked how things were at the company. Danielle hesitated for a moment, then smiled and said, "For the first time, I think things are finally on the right path." She didn't mention awards, news coverage, or public recognition. She spoke of listening, respect, and building invisible bridges. They laughed and reminisced old stories. The first flight Danielle took, the day she was turned away from an interview because her name didn't sound executive, and the blue notebook where she wrote her dreams. Then, as she left, Danielle looked at the backyard, where the old, rusty bicycle she used to ride to the library still stood. She gently touched the handlebar, like someone visiting their roots. And in that instant, she understood something she had yet to name. Everything she had endured, every humiliation, every silence, every rejection had shaped the woman she had become. But more than that, it had paved the way so others wouldn't have to suffer the same pains. And that was her true legacy. At the end of that day, Danielle returned home and sat on the sofa again, but this time with a different feeling in her chest. There was something light, almost silent, yet unwavering. It was peace. Not because the world had changed, but because she had done her part. She picked up her phone and opened her photo gallery. She saw the picture she'd taken on the plane right after the attendant humiliated her. She nearly deleted it dozens of times, but now she decided to do something different. She created a new album called Memories That Don't Fade, and there, she saved not only that image, but also screenshots of messages of support she'd received, photos with employees, news clippings. Not to feed vanity, but to never forget how much it costs to change what needs changing. Danielle knew the fight was far from over, that there would be other flights, other looks, other layers of disguised prejudice. But now, there was one thing no one could take away from her, the certainty that, even in silence, even alone, she had made a real impact. Because true power isn't about stepping onto a stage when everyone applauds, but standing firm when no one expects you to. And in the case of Danielle Carter, the woman mistaken for just another passenger in seat 1A, she didn't merely stand her ground. She made that seat a symbol, a permanent reminder that dignity isn't begged for, it's asserted.